Sleep Stories for Restless Minds. Tonight, settle in for the true horizon, a quiet, reflective journey across the ocean between a boy and his grandfather. Set in the 20th century, this soft-spoken tale unfolds on a fishing boat surrounded by sky, water, and memory. As they drift from shore to shore, the sea reveals not only nature's rhythm, but the quiet strength of love, trust, and growing up. This story is slow and gentle, perfect for sleep, relaxation, or those moments when you need to let go of the day. Whether you're here to fall asleep or simply drift, this story was made for you. The dawn came pale over the harbor, soft light folding across misty water like an old letter being opened. In the gentle hush before the world fully woke, Samuel, aged 10, stood on the creaking dock beside his grandfather, Elias, whose lined face held more stories than the sea could remember. Elias's fishing boat, the Mariner's Hope, bobbed quietly as he secured the last coil of rope. Its hull was painted the color of storm clouds, with patches worn smooth by salt and sun. The nets lay bundled on deck, and an old compass, brass but clouded, hung from Elias's belt. Samuel climbed aboard, small boots echoing on weathered planks. He carried a tin lunchbox and a worn journal, its pages waiting for the journey's first lines. His grandfather watched him settle by the cabin door, then nodded once, the way you do when you trust someone to keep their footing on shifting ground. They pushed off. The boat glided into the early tide, the dock sliding away like a fragment of yesterday. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their calls softer than usual, as if even they respected the quiet between boy and man. Elias stood at the wheel, hands resting on the spokes. He said nothing at first, no need. The sea spoke in its own tongue, a low sigh against the hull, the faint slap of waves, the occasional clink of rigging. Samuel opened his journal, pen poised, capturing the brine on the breeze. Today we leave the world behind. The horizon waits. They sailed past fishing skiffs still tied to their moorings, past the lighthouse marking safe passage. Samuel watched the land recede, roofs shrinking, fields becoming stripes of green, the harbor's edges blurring into memory. At noon, Elias called him up to the bow. He handed Samuel the brass compass. "Keep this," he said quietly. "It'll tell you where you've been." Samuel felt its weight, warm in his palm, humming faintly with promise. They ate their lunch in companionable silence, salt-cured fish on thick bread, apples that smelled of orchards, and tea that tasted of home. The boat rocked gently, and Samuel noticed for the first time how every sway felt like an invitation to see farther, to listen closer, to remember that the world was larger than any harbor's walls. As the sun climbed, the outline of land faded into haze. Only sea and sky remained, endless, unbroken, full of question. Samuel closed his journal and looked to his grandfather. Elias smiled, a small gesture that carried more warmth than midday light. Then he turned back to the helm and whispered, as if sharing a secret with the wind, "Welcome to the true horizon, boy." The morning wore on gently, like a coat that didn't quite fit, but kept you warm anyway. The ocean had settled into a rhythm, quiet but certain. Low waves rolled like the breath of something asleep, and the gulls had vanished, replaced by sky that stretched on with nothing to interrupt it. Elias kept one hand on the wheel. Samuel sat beside him on a short crate, hugging his knees, eyes tracking the ripples that curled out from the bow. "What makes the boat go straight?" he finally asked. Elias tapped the wheel. "This, and the stars, and the feel in your bones when you've been out long enough." Samuel blinked. "I thought it was the compass." Elias chuckled, not unkindly. "That'll tell you where north is, but it won't tell you what you're sailing toward." They took turns at the helm. Elias showed him how to watch the shape of the waves, how to steer with fingertips instead of fists. He taught him that the ocean had moods, and that some days it asked you to listen more than speak. "There's a difference," he said, "between driving a boat and following water." Samuel tried to understand. He stared out at the endless blue and realized something. There were no signs, no roads, no markers, and yet Elias seemed to know exactly where they were. "How do you know?" Samuel asked. His grandfather shrugged. "You don't, not exactly. You trust the boat. You trust the tide. You trust the sky when it's clear and your instincts when it isn't." Then he looked at Samuel and added softly, "And sometimes you trust the quiet. By afternoon, the wind shifted. Elias adjusted the sail without a word, the canvas snapping to new tension. The boat leaned just a touch, and Samuel's stomach fluttered, not from fear, but from the strange joy of being carried by something invisible. He held the compass again. It pointed northwest now, but he didn't feel like they were going in any particular direction. Just forward? In the distance, a dark shape appeared on the water, slow-moving, low and heavy. A merchant vessel, larger than anything Samuel had seen up close. Its smokestack coughed gray into the sky. Painted letters on the hull spelled Eleanor May, and Samuel wondered where it had come from, what it carried, and whether anyone aboard had ever seen his small boat and his small face floating across the wide water. Elias raised 2 fingers in a sailor's greeting. The other ship answered with a soft horn, then passed by like a dream. That night they ate beans and bread warmed on the little oil stove. Samuel lay curled in the tiny berth below deck, the lantern casting soft amber light across the wooden walls. He could hear Elias above, still at the wheel, humming something low and slow and wordless. Samuel pulled his journal close and wrote, "I think the sea is a teacher. It doesn't tell you answers. It just waits until you figure them out." The boat rocked him to sleep, not gently but steadily, like the ocean saying you're small but safe. By morning, the light was strange. It crept through the cabin window like a ghost unsure of its welcome. When Samuel sat up in his bunk, he noticed the silence first. No gulls, no waves, no wind. Just a muffled stillness. He climbed up to the deck and stopped short. Fog. Thick, heavy, pale as milk. It blanketed the sea, pressed against the boat, and swallowed everything beyond arm's reach. The world had narrowed to the deck, the mast, and Elias's figure standing at the bow, still as a statue, eyes lost in white. Samuel stepped closer. "Can you see anything?" Elias didn't turn. "Enough." Fog, Elias explained, was like an old man's memory. It rolls in without warning, stays longer than it should, and when it leaves, you're not always where you thought you were. Samuel tried to smile. Elias did not. They didn't move the boat. Not right away. Elias anchored her, lit the small kettle, and poured hot water over dried lemon peel and herbs. They drank in silence. The steam curled up into the fog like it belonged there. After a while, Elias began to tell a story. "When I was your age," he said, "I crossed this sea with my father. Not for fishing, not for pleasure. For leaving." Samuel sat beside him, knees drawn up, listening. "We had a boat smaller than this one, a sail patched with flour sacks, a compass that spun like a drunk. But we had wind, and we had each other." He sipped his tea. "We left behind stone streets and walls too quiet. We sailed toward something we didn't know." Samuel asked, "Were you scared?" Elias looked into the fog. "Of course, but not of the sea. I was scared we'd forget the sound of home. Turns out the ocean holds everything if you let it." Later, Elias let Samuel climb the mast partway, just enough to see above the deck. But even from up there, it was all fog. Endless, soft, and soundless. Samuel thought of the compass in his pocket. He didn't take it out. He didn't need it today. Instead, he returned to his journal and wrote, "The world got smaller today, but I think it's still whole, even when you can't see it." That night, they ate salted fish and bread warmed on the stove. The fog still pressed against the boat, like a sleeping animal curled around them. Elias whispered, "This is what waiting looks like." Samuel nodded, and fell asleep to the sound of nothing at all. The fog lifted slowly. Not all at once, like curtains being drawn, but gently, like a story remembered, line by line. By midday, patches of blue began to peek through, and the shape of the sea returned in broken pieces. A wave here, the curve of the horizon there, the distant shimmer of light across moving water. Elias stirred the boat to life. The anchor came up with a hollow thunk, the sails adjusted to the wind's return, and the old engine coughed into rhythm, like an elder clearing its throat after too much silence. Samuel watched the water reappear as if it had been stitched back together. He said, "It's like we disappeared for a while, right?" Elias gave a quiet nod. We did. The sea looked different now. Not just because of the fog, but because of time. Hours of stillness had shifted something. Samuel felt it in the way the boat moved, in the way he no longer needed to ask what came next. He trusted Elias's hands at the wheel and the gentle pull of the tide. They passed flocks of seabirds bobbing quietly. Elias pointed to one. Storm petrels. They ride close to the water. When they fly in circles like that, it means wind is coming. Samuel squinted at them. Do they ever get lost? Elias said, They never ask where they're going. As the wind picked up, Elias let the sails take over again. Samuel stood at the bow, arms stretched out a little, eyes closed. The wind pressed gently against his chest. He imagined that if he leaned forward, the sea would catch him. But he didn't lean. Not yet. In the afternoon they came across driftwood, whole planks, sea-worn and smooth. Samuel fished one from the water using a long hook. It had a nail still in it, rusted deep. What do you think it was from? He asked. Elias studied the board. Could have been a deck, a houseboat, a ship from a war or a wedding. Then he touched the nail head with his thumb. Doesn't matter what it was, it's what it is now. Samuel later carved his initials into the driftwood and tied it to the rail with rope. I want it to ride with us, he said. Elias nodded once and said nothing. But Samuel noticed he smiled at the corner of his mouth, just a little. That night the stars came back, so many it made Samuel dizzy. Elias showed him how to find Orion and the North Star, and how to follow the line from the belt to the edge of the world. They sat side by side on the deck, backs to the mast, wrapped in wool blankets, sipping warm broth from tin mugs. Samuel wrote in his journal, The sea remembers everything, even when we don't. But tonight I remembered who I am. The ocean was dark and soft like velvet stretched between two fading lanterns. Samuel stirred beneath his blanket, eyes still full of stars, the sky above wide and endless. Elias hadn't gone below. He remained at the helm, quiet and still, one hand resting on the wheel, not steering, just touching it, as if to remind the boat they were still there. Samuel climbed up, dragging his blanket with him, and sat beside his grandfather. You never sleep, he whispered. Elias smiled slow. The sea doesn't either. Someone ought to keep it company. They sat in silence. Only the hush of water against the hull and the occasional creak of wood joined them. Above, stars glimmered with ancient patience. Samuel pointed to one. That one's bright, Elias said. One of the first star sailors ever learned. Do you still use it to steer? Elias shrugged. Sometimes, but mostly to remember. He told Samuel a story. Not long. Just a moment from his own youth. A night when his father had fallen sick at sea and he'd stayed awake all night, watching Vega to be sure the boat held steady. I didn't know where we were, he said, but I knew we were okay. That was enough. Samuel didn't ask what happened to his great-grandfather. He just listened. And the silence that followed was deep but not sad. It was the kind of silence you trust. Later that morning, clouds rolled in. Thick and low like the fog, but heavier. Rain came quietly in silver threads, tapping the deck and soaking the sails. Samuel pulled his coat tighter. Elias worked the rigging calmly, rain dripping from his cap. The sea didn't rise in anger, just swelled gently as though breathing through its nose. They kept moving. Below deck, they dried their hands and lit the oil lamp. The soft glow lit the tiny cabin in golden shadow. Elias opened a wooden box near the floor. Inside paper charts, rolled and tied with twine. He untied one and spread it on the little table. Time to learn to read the sea. The chart was a map of the Atlantic, long lines, compass roses, faded ink notes in Elias's handwriting. Samuel leaned close. Are these places we've been? Some I hope we'll never see again. Samuel traced a finger along one curved path, down past an archipelago marked only with a small X. What's that one? Elias answered softly. That's where the current pretends to be your friend, pulls you sideways for days if you don't know better. Samuel paused. And did you? Not the first time, Elias said with a quiet grin. That night they made warm tea and sat cross-legged beside the lantern. Samuel wrote, "The sky teaches you to steer, the sea teaches you to remember, and the boat teaches you not to rush." And as the rain softened to mist, they let the quiet return. By morning, the rain had passed. The deck glistened with leftover drops, and a thin line of cloud hovered just above the sea, like the sky hadn't finished waking up. Samuel rose early, wiping sleep from his eyes as he stepped barefoot onto the cold, damp planks. Elias had already been up, he always was, and was crouched near the starboard edge, untangling a net. "Catch anything?" Samuel asked. "Not today," Elias said. "Not yet." They worked together that morning. The kind of work that didn't need much talking. Elias showed him how to coil rope so it wouldn't tangle, how to oil the hinges on the cabin door, how to scrub the deck with seawater and stiff brushes to keep the wood strong. They worked in a rhythm. Samuel's hands grew sore from the scrubbing. His arms ached. He got a splinter he didn't mention, but he didn't complain. When they stopped for a break, Elias handed him a slice of bread and a wedge of sharp cheese wrapped in wax paper. "You did good," he said simply. Samuel took a bite. It tasted like pride and salt. Later, Elias pulled out a small box from under the bench near the helm. Inside were things that didn't belong on a fishing boat: a silver harmonica, a pair of cracked reading glasses, a deck of hand-drawn cards tied in a string, and a faded photograph of a woman standing barefoot on a pier. Samuel held the photo gently. "Is this Grandma?" Elias nodded once. "Her name was Lita?" "She looks kind," Samuel said. "She was," Elias whispered. And he didn't say more. But he looked at the photo for a long time before returning it to the box. In the early afternoon, they fished. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The lines cut gentle arcs into the sea, the bobbers drifting slowly in the current. Samuel caught 2 mackerel. Elias caught none. But he smiled anyway. Lucky hands today? They cleaned the fish together, Samuel grimacing at the smell and texture, Elias humming a tune as he worked. Afterward, Elias fried the fish on the small iron skillet over the stove, adding just salt and lemon. Samuel ate in silence, chewing slowly. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. That night the sea was flat as glass. The stars came out in full. And Elias, without explanation, handed Samuel the harmonica. "I don't know how to play," Samuel said. "Doesn't matter." So Samuel blew a few awkward notes, high and bending, unsure. But Elias didn't correct him. He just listened, leaning back against the mast, eyes closed. And the boat, rocked gently by the tide, seemed to hum along. In his journal, Samuel wrote, "Some days are just for simple things: scrubbing, fishing, remembering, and playing songs you don't know how to play." It was past midnight when Samuel woke. Something had stirred him, a sound or a feeling. The boat was still rocking gently, the boards creaking in their usual rhythm. But the air felt different, cooler, charged somehow. He slipped from his bunk, careful not to wake Elias, though he had a feeling his grandfather was already awake. Above deck, the night was moonless, but the sky was clear, thick with stars. The sea reflected them so precisely it was hard to tell where sky ended and water began. And then he saw them. Lights. Faint, bluish-white flickers dancing just beneath the surface, keeping pace with the boat like a school of invisible fish. Samuel leaned over the rail. Phosphorescence. Tiny living creatures glowing in the water with every ripple and stroke. The wake of the boat shimmered like silver thread, unraveling across the sea. Elias appeared beside him, quiet as a thought. "They call it sea fire," he said, voice hushed. Samuel's eyes widened. "Why does it glow?" "Because it's alive," Elias said simply, "and it doesn't like to be forgotten." They stood side by side for a long while, watching the lights trail behind them. Samuel whispered, "Is it always there?" Elias said, "You only see it when the night is dark enough." Later, they sat on the deck with a blanket over their legs and passed Elias's harmonica back and forth. Samuel tried to play the tune Elias had hummed while gutting fish earlier. He missed notes, started over, missed again. But Elias nodded slowly. Keep going. Music always finds its way. Then Elias told a story. Not from his life, but an old sea tale, half truth, half dream. About a man who followed sea fire across the ocean for 7 days until it led him to an island made of lanterns. And there he found someone waiting who remembered his name, even though he had forgotten it himself. Samuel listened without blinking. When the story ended, he said, "Do you think that place is real?" Elias shrugged. Most things worth sailing toward can't be found on maps. They returned to their bunks just before dawn. The stars began to fade. The phosphorescent trail behind the boat still shimmered faintly, as if the sea was writing something in a language only the night could read. Samuel wrote in his journal before falling asleep. "I think the sea tells stories at night. You just have to be quiet enough to hear them." The next morning brought a sky the color of soft pewter. Not stormy, just unsure. The wind was light but persistent, enough to ruffle the corners of Elias's charts as he laid one across the wooden bench. Samuel looked over his shoulder. "Where are we now?" Elias didn't answer at first. He ran his finger along one long curving line on the paper. "Somewhere between what we left and what we'll remember," he said eventually. Samuel grinned. "That's not very exact." "It's not that kind of map." Around midday, they spotted land small and green, like a smear of moss rising from the ocean's palm. An island. Samuel leaned forward, eyes wide. "Can we stop?" Elias nodded. "If it lets us." They dropped anchor just offshore. The island had no dock, just a rocky beach with tangled vines and birds that didn't seem to mind visitors. Samuel stepped onto the shore with bare feet. The sand was coarse and warm. Above the rocks he found a path, not marked, but visible in the way wildflowers leaned, as though people had once passed that way often. He followed it until he reached a clearing. A single tree stood there, tall, bent with age, branches curled into itself like arms folded in thought. Someone had carved initials into the bark long ago. The letters had faded, but the memory lingered. Samuel pressed his fingers gently to the trunk. Elias found him sitting beneath the tree, drawing in his journal. He didn't say anything, just lowered himself beside Samuel and handed him a tin cup of water. "Who do you think lived here?" Samuel asked. Elias shrugged. "Doesn't take much to live somewhere. Just a little time and a reason to stay." Samuel looked around. "But it feels like nobody remembers it." "Places don't forget themselves," Elias said. "They wait." They didn't stay long. Elias said the tide would shift soon, and the island might not be there by tomorrow. That night, as the boat pulled away, Samuel watched the shape of the land grow smaller, then blur, then vanish into the horizon like breath on glass. Under the lantern's glow, Samuel wrote, "Some islands aren't meant to be found again, but if you sit quiet enough, you can still hear the echo of someone laughing there." The next day dawned in stillness, the kind that didn't ask for conversation. Elias didn't say much, not even during breakfast, which was just bread and cold fish and tea that had gone bitter from steeping too long. He nodded at Samuel, passed him a tin cup, then sat quietly at the helm, eyes scanning the sea. Samuel didn't ask questions. He didn't write in his journal either. Instead, he cleaned the deck again, not because it needed it, but because his hands wanted something to do. The bristles of the brush scraped rhythmically against the wood, and the sound became a kind of thinking. Later, he sat on the steps to the cabin, elbows on his knees, watching the waves go by. Small ones today? Like the sea was whispering instead of breathing. In the afternoon, Elias pulled out a folded cloth from below the bench. Inside it, a worn leather pouch with an old deck of cards, the corners soft, the pictures faded. He dealt quietly on the crate between them, 5 each. Samuel recognized the rules rummy. They didn't speak. They just played. Hand after hand. No scores kept. No winner named. When the sun dipped low and painted everything in bronze, Elias lit the lantern and leaned back. Still quiet, Samuel thought to ask what he was thinking, but he didn't. Instead, he reached for his journal and wrote, without reading it back. Some days don't need words, just weather, just space, just someone sitting near you while the sea keeps moving. They ate soup with broken crackers that night. The kind of meal that didn't need tasting, just warmth. Elias patted Samuel's shoulder once as he passed him a spoon. And for some reason, that small gesture meant more than any story ever could. Outside, the stars returned. Fewer tonight, but just enough. And Elias finally spoke, just one line. "Tomorrow, we'll catch something." Samuel nodded. And in the dark, he smiled. The sea was awake before the sky. Samuel stirred early, just after the first pale streak of blue cut across the eastern horizon. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and climbed out onto the deck to find Elias already at the rail, baiting a line with careful fingers. "Today," Elias said without turning, "we fish for real." The morning was cool, not cold. A breeze moved gently across the surface of the water, carrying the soft scent of salt and something older, kelp maybe, or wood soaked with time. Elias handed Samuel a pole. It was heavier than it looked, its reel worn, the line frayed near the end, but still strong. "Hold it steady," he said, "but let the sea do most of the work." They fished for hours. Not all in a row. Sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes Elias told him tricks about reading ripples, watching for birds, waiting for just the right tension in the line. Samuel watched and listened and waited. And then, without warning, his line jerked. It wasn't a big fish. A snapper, Elias said, about the size of Samuel's forearm. But when it hit the deck, flicking water in frantic bursts, Samuel stared at it like it had appeared out of magic. He reached for it slowly, unsure. Elias stepped in, quick and calm, unhooking it and showing Samuel how to hold it behind the gills. "You fed us," Elias said to the fish, almost like a prayer. Then he nodded once and cleaned it with practiced care. They ate it by midday. Pan-fried with garlic and a little salt, served with boiled potatoes from the bottom stores. It wasn't much, but it felt like a feast. Later that afternoon, Elias let Samuel steer again. Not long, just through a stretch of smooth water where the wind blew steady and the horizon rolled out wide like a song. Samuel stood tall at the helm, knuckles white on the wheel, and tried to breathe like his grandfather, slow, steady, sure. "You've got the sea's patience," Elias said. Samuel didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, Elias carved a small notch into the inside of the rail. "For the first catch," he said, then handed the knife to Samuel. "You'll carve the next one." That night, under stars that blinked soft and gold, Samuel wrote, "The ocean gave us something today, not just the fish, but the feeling that we belong here too." The weather turned still again the next morning. No fog, no wind, no swell, just calm. The kind of calm that makes time feel thick, like honey on the edge of a spoon. Samuel sat near the bow with his knees hugged to his chest, the sea stretching silent in every direction. The line between water and sky was nearly invisible, as if the boat had anchored in the middle of a thought not yet spoken. Below deck, Elias rummaged through an old crate. Samuel could hear papers shifting, something wooden being moved, a quiet sigh. When Elias returned, he held a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, tied with worn string. He sat beside Samuel, unwrapping it slowly. Inside letters. Old ones. Some sealed, some not. The pages were yellowed, edges curled like leaves in the wind. The ink had faded into brown threads, but the writing was still there. Samuel didn't speak. Elias handed him one of the unopened envelopes. "To your father?" Samuel asked quietly. Elias nodded. "I wrote them years ago. Meant to send them. Never did." They sat with the letters for a long time. Some were stories, short notes about storms or sunrises. Some were memories Elias had wanted to share, but never found the right time. One was just a list of names and places, people who'd helped him, ports he'd passed through, harbors where he once thought of staying. Samuel opened one and read it silently. It was addressed to "My boy someday." It wasn't about anything in particular, just a morning where Elias had seen a gull land on the rail and for a brief moment thought of home so clearly it hurt. Samuel folded it carefully and gave it back. Elias placed the letter back into the oilcloth and retied the string. "Things you don't send still matter," he said. "They didn't fish that day, didn't clean, didn't chart anything. They just drifted." And Samuel imagined the boat moving not across water, but across years, carrying every word his grandfather never said, and every one he would one day write. That night, when the sky turned violet and the stars blinked into their places again, Samuel lit the lantern and opened his journal. He wrote just one sentence. "Some letters don't have to travel far. They're already where they belong." That morning came slower than the rest. Samuel awoke to a low rumble, soft at first, like someone dragging furniture across a distant room, the kind of sound that sinks into your bones before it reaches your ears. The sky was pale but darkening. Clouds loomed along the horizon, shaped like mountains wrapped in smoke. Samuel climbed to the deck, finding Elias already there, looking west. "Storm?" Samuel asked, voice small. Elias nodded once. "It'll miss us. Or it won't." They made ready anyway, tied everything down, closed the cabin shutters, checked the sail lines twice. Samuel worked quickly, his hands fumbling at first, then steadier. Elias didn't speak, just gave nods of approval and short gestures when something needed fixing. There was a rhythm to it. Preparing was a kind of prayer. By afternoon, the first gust came. Not violent, just firm, decided. It lifted the edge of the canvas, hissed across the surface of the sea, and reminded Samuel of how very small the boat truly was. Elias turned the wheel slightly. Not away from the storm, but toward it, just enough to ride the edge. Rain followed. At first a scatter of drops, then a curtain. The world disappeared for a while. Samuel sat below deck, knees to chest, listening to the water thrum against the roof above. It wasn't frightening, just loud, like the ocean had finally decided to speak, and it didn't care who was listening. Elias stepped down after a while, soaked and smiling. "She's holding," he said. "Good boat." They ate cold bread and a bit of jerky from a tin. The lantern rocked back and forth in its hook, casting dancing shadows. Elias didn't seem worried. He leaned back, eyes half closed, letting the boat sway. "She's louder than usual," Samuel said. "She's just telling her story," Elias answered. "Let her finish." By midnight, the storm had moved on. The rain softened to mist. The sea calmed like an exhale, the boat riding small waves with a new kind of peace. Samuel opened the hatch and climbed to the deck. Above him, a single bright star had returned, piercing and clear. In his journal, he wrote, "The storm didn't break us. It reminded us that we were already strong." Then he closed his eyes and let the boat carry him into sleep. The storm had left its fingerprints. Not damage exactly, but small reminders. A snapped rope here, a shifted crate below deck. One of the portholes had taken on a faint leak, trickling seawater down the wooden wall in slow, apologetic drops. Elias didn't rush to fix it. He moved like someone patching up an old coat, steady, practiced, trusting the process. Samuel watched as his grandfather reknotted the lines, replaced a split hinge with a spare from the toolbox, and wedged a soft bit of canvas into the leaky window frame. "Out here," Elias said, "things aren't perfect. They're just mended." Samuel thought about that. They spent the better part of the day checking every part of the boat. The deck got scrubbed again, the sail was lowered and inspected, the lanterns were refilled, the compass cleaned with a cloth that smelled of salt and something older, like pine or tobacco or thyme. Samuel helped with each task, his fingers now used to the rough grain of rope and the clank of tools against bolts. "You're good at this now," Elias said, adjusting the rigging. Samuel tried to play it cool, but he couldn't stop the corner of his mouth from lifting just slightly. That afternoon, the sun came out in full. The clouds dissolved into scattered streaks, like chalk smudged across a blue slate. The sea responded with a soft shimmer, the kind that made everything look like it had been dipped in silver. Elias let the boat drift for a while. No sails, no engine, just the tide. They sat together on the bow, watching the world pass slowly around them. "You know," Elias said, "some people think quiet means nothing's happening." Samuel waited. "But that's when things sink in," Elias continued. "That's when you become who you're going to be." Samuel wrote that down in his journal. "We fixed the boat today, but maybe it was fixing us too." And as night began to fall, he felt more at home on the water than he ever had on land. The ocean stretched behind them like a long, quiet memory. In the early morning light, Samuel stood at the stern, watching the wake spiral out in soft lines behind the boat. The water foamed and curled, but then smoothed again as if nothing had passed at all. He thought about how quickly movement disappears, even loud things, even important ones. When Elias joined him with 2 tin mugs of tea, Samuel asked, "Do you think the sea remembers us?" Elias didn't answer right away. He handed Samuel a mug, then leaned on the rail beside him. "She remembers everything," he said finally, "but not like we do. She remembers in motion, in pull and tide, not in pictures." Samuel thought about that for a long time. After breakfast, Elias brought out a wooden box Samuel hadn't seen before. Inside glass bottles, each with a cork and scraps of thick, aged paper. "We used to do this for fun," Elias said. "When I was a boy—" "Messages in bottles?" Samuel asked. Elias nodded. He handed one to Samuel. "Write something true. Doesn't have to be big. Doesn't even have to make sense. Just something honest." Samuel sat quietly at the little table, the boat swaying gently. He dipped the pen in ink and paused, then wrote, "I'm not lost, just between places." He rolled the paper, slid it into the bottle, and sealed it with the cork. They tossed them overboard together, 2 small splashes swallowed by the endless blue. Elias smiled faintly. Someone might find them, or no one will. Doesn't matter. That afternoon, the wind shifted, so they adjusted course slightly. Not much, just a few degrees east, but it felt like a new chapter. Elias marked the new heading on the chart. Samuel marked it in his journal. "We turned a little today, not because we had to, just because it felt right." Later, after the stars returned and the boat rocked them into stillness, Elias whispered, "Some things are meant to float." Samuel didn't ask what he meant. He just held that thought like a small light and drifted off to sleep. It started as a scent. A faint change in the air, drier somehow. Less salt, more soil. Samuel smelled it before he saw anything. It lingered at the edges of the wind like a whisper of grass. They had been at sea for long enough that the smell startled him. "Land," Elias said softly, eyes on the horizon. "Not close yet, but near enough for the wind to remember it." Samuel stood, craning to see. Nothing but blue. Still, he believed him. By mid-morning, faint outlines appeared, small, low hills like sleeping animals against the sky. The boat rocked steadily forward, and Samuel could feel a strange pull in his stomach. Not nerves, not excitement, something else. "Do we stop?" he asked. Elias shook his head. "Not this one." "Why not?" "It's not ours." They passed the island slowly. It looked untouched, no docks, no smoke, no people. Just green slopes and a few crooked trees bent by wind. Birds circled above it like it was a secret worth keeping. Samuel found himself staring, trying to memorize it. "Sometimes you just pass by things," Elias said. "Doesn't mean they weren't part of your story." Later that day, the wind dropped again. They drifted on calm water, the engine quiet, the sail slack against the mast. It was the kind of stillness that made everything louder, the creak of rope, the distant splash of a fish, the scrape of a tin cup against the wooden bench. Elias handed Samuel a book. A small cloth-bound one, the cover worn smooth. "Thought you might be ready." Samuel turned it over in his hands. "What is it?" "My father's journal," Elias said. "Same trip, long ago." Samuel opened it slowly. Inside were sketches, notes about the sea, and pressed leaves from places Elias had never spoken of. He read one entry out loud. "The water is not what separates things. It's what connects them." Samuel looked up. Elias was watching the horizon again. And for the first time, Samuel saw his grandfather not as a guide, but as someone still sailing, still searching. That night the stars felt closer. Samuel wrote, "Land is behind us, and ahead of us, but here, out here, is where all the stories echo." The next morning came slow, thick with sunlight. No clouds, no wind, just the hush of a glassy ocean stretching in every direction like a polished mirror. Samuel sat with Elias on the deck, polishing the brass compass. It had always sat near the helm, a round, heavy thing, its face marked with elegant letters NESW. Only now there was no needle. At some point, maybe during the storm, maybe years ago, the thin, vital sliver of metal that pointed the way had vanished. Samuel stared at the empty dial. "How does it still work?" he asked. Elias grinned. "It doesn't." Samuel blinked. "It's just a reminder now," Elias said. "Sometimes the point isn't where you're going, but that you're still moving." They spent the day sailing without a destination. No marked route. No clock. Just motion. Elias let Samuel chart a playful course on the map, zigzag spirals, a wide circle like a dance step across the sea. He called it wandering with intention. They laughed about it, but they sailed it anyway. Later, Elias told a story. Not about storms or fish, but about a day long ago when he tried to run away, took a rowboat out with no food, no map, and a heart full of something he couldn't name. "I thought I wanted freedom," he said, "but I was just afraid of staying." Samuel didn't say anything. He just listened, eyes on the sea, mind somewhere between past and now. That evening, they found a bottle floating in the water. One of theirs? Maybe. Elias fished it out with a hook and passed it to Samuel. Inside a message, waterlogged but readable. "You are not alone on the ocean, even if you can't see anyone." Samuel looked up at his grandfather. "I didn't write that one," he said. Elias smiled faintly. "Doesn't mean it wasn't meant for you." They tied the needleless compass to the rail with a bit of string. Let it swing gently with the rocking of the boat. And that night Samuel wrote, "Even without a needle, the compass still points to something. I think it points to trust." It was just after sunset when the light began to flicker. Not the stars. Not the sea. The lantern. The small brass one that hung just inside the cabin door, swaying gently, always lit from dusk until sleep, casting soft gold across their worn journals, their teacups, the quiet curve of their shoulders. Samuel noticed it first. The flame dimmed, then flared, then faded again. Elias tapped the base. "No one's touched the oil today," he said. Samuel opened the side and checked. Still full. Elias raised an eyebrow. Well, must be something else, then. Instead of replacing it, they left it alone. Let it flicker. Let it try. The flame danced like it was working through something, unsure of whether it wanted to stay or rest. So they moved more slowly that night, whispered their words, let the quiet expand, not as silence, but as care. After a while, Elias pulled something from beneath his coat. An old pocket watch. Cracked along the face, the chain rusted, but still ticking. He placed it on the table between them. "This stopped once," he said. "For 3 years." Samuel looked at him, waiting. "It was in a drawer," Elias continued. "I forgot about it. Then one day I picked it up, gave it a shake. It ticked like nothing had happened." He smiled gently. Things don't need to be constant to be true. Outside, the sea moved in slow rolls, no wind, just current. The stars blinked above, soft and patient. And the lantern, without warning, steadied. Its flame glowed full again, as if it had simply remembered how. Elias raised his tea. "To things that return," he said. Samuel clinked his mug against it. "To things that wait." Before sleep, Samuel wrote, Some lights flicker, some pause, but when they come back, they feel even warmer than before. He left the lantern burning a little longer that night. Just because. It was Elias's idea to power up the old radio. It sat in the corner of the cabin, half buried under rope and old books, its knobs stiff with salt and age. Samuel had seen it a dozen times but never thought it worked. Used to pick up music, Elias said, placing it gently on the table. Sometimes voices, not always the kind you could answer. Samuel raised an eyebrow. You mean like ghosts? Elias smiled without looking up. Not ghosts, just people talking far away, sometimes farther than you'd expect. They cleaned the battery housing, adjusted the dial, and connected a wire to the mast for a makeshift antenna. Then Elias gave the rusted knob a slow, deliberate turn. Static. A whisper. A hum. And then a voice. Crackling and soft, like it had traveled through time instead of air. Clouds low passing on your left. Then silence. Then music. It was an old waltz, grainy and slow like a dream told through a tin can. Samuel didn't recognize the tune, but Elias did. His eyes got that faraway look again, like they sometimes did when he wasn't speaking. They let it play through dinner. Fish and hard bread, hot broth in metal cups. The waltz kept playing, skipping now and then but never stopping completely. Elias told Samuel about the first time he'd heard it. In a tavern on the edge of a fishing town where the windows were always fogged and the smell of salt lived in the wood itself. He'd been young and broke and unsure of everything. But the music had made him feel something anchored. Samuel listened quietly, imagining that version of Elias, thin, wind-chapped, eyes full of wonder. "Do you think the radio's picking up the past?" he asked. Elias shrugged. "I think the past never really leaves. We just tune in sometimes." They didn't turn the radio off when they went to sleep. Let the hum fill the cabin. A pulse, a tether, something older than either of them, moving gently through the air, like breath. That night, Samuel wrote, "Some signals don't need to be clear to feel true. They just need to find you when you're listening." Samuel woke to a stillness that felt older than silence. The boat wasn't anchored, but it didn't feel like it was moving either. Just floating, a long exhale held in the middle of a sentence. Elias was already up, hunched over the map table, spreading out a chart Samuel had never seen before. This one wasn't like the others. The usual crisp grid lines and labeled ports were gone. In their place were soft strokes of ink and watercolor. Shapes that looked more like suggestions than geography. Shorelines that bled into cloud-like swirls. Dotted paths that disappeared into white space. Samuel approached quietly. "What is it?" Elias didn't look up. "It's the one you only use when you've stopped trying to get somewhere." Samuel blinked. Elias tapped one of the open edges of the paper. "See how it doesn't end?" Samuel nodded. "That's where the real places begin." They spent the morning sketching their own additions to the map. Samuel drew the tiny island with the bent tree. Elias marked a curl in the current where they'd once drifted in perfect silence for half an hour. Together, they added a shape for the place they'd caught their first fish, a circle with a small star in the middle. "This map won't help anyone else," Samuel said. "Exactly," Elias replied. Later, they made paper boats from old pages of Elias's notebook, corners already frayed from salt and time. They set them loose in the wake, watching them drift slowly, tilting this way and that, before the sea folded them gently into itself. One boat caught the breeze and spun in a tight circle before vanishing under a low wave. Samuel smiled. "Maps don't have to make sense," he said. Elias nodded. "They just have to hold the truth." That evening, they pinned the map to the cabin wall. It rippled slightly in the wind, catching the lantern light like a flag. Samuel wrote in his journal, "Some maps lead nowhere. Some lead to yourself." He traced the edge of the page and wondered what part of the sea he was made of now. That night, Elias asked Samuel to take the night watch. Not the whole night, just a few hours while the stars were high and the sea was quiet. "You're ready," he said simply, handing him a thick sweater and a small thermos of tea. The sea doesn't always speak, but she watches. So should you. Samuel sat near the helm, wrapped in the warmth of wool and salt and the quiet responsibility of being trusted. The stars looked different when you were the only one awake. Bigger, brighter, a little lonelier. But not in a bad way. Just in a way that made you feel real. The ocean made its usual sounds. Gentle slaps of water against the hull. Rope creaking slightly. The boat breathing in its own wooden way. Samuel sat with it all, not trying to change anything, just letting the night be what it was. He thought about what it meant to be trusted with something. The wheel, the quiet, the whole boat. Elias had gone below without hesitation, like he knew the sea would be in good hands. That meant something. It wasn't just about steering. It was about being part of something older than himself. After a while, he made a slow loop of the deck. Checked the lines. Tapped the compass out of habit, even though it still had no needle. Stood at the bow and let the wind move his hair. The sea whispered like it was half asleep. Samuel whispered back, just to see if it would listen. When Elias returned near dawn, he didn't ask questions, just nodded once and poured them both a cup of water. "How was she?" he asked. Samuel smiled softly. "Still here?" Elias raised his cup. "Then so are we." In his journal, Samuel wrote, "Night isn't something you pass through. It's something that passes through you." He tucked the words between the pages like a second kind of map. They found the photograph mid-morning. It was tucked in the bottom of a rusted tin, the kind Elias kept for loose nails, spare buttons, and coins from places that didn't exist on current maps. Samuel had been digging through it, looking for a length of wire, when the edge of something flat and curled caught his eye. He pulled it out gently. It was black and white, faded, scratched, but you could still see the figures. 3 people, standing in front of a boat that looked remarkably like theirs. A boy, maybe 12, a man with wind-tossed hair, and another older man, hat tipped low, one hand on the tiller. Samuel turned it over. On the back, in faint pencil, "North of the rocks. Summer of the year we almost stayed." Elias didn't say anything when Samuel showed him the photo. He took it slowly, studied it for a long time, then gave the faintest of nods. "My father, and his," Elias said at last, tapping each figure in turn. "And the boy?" Elias smiled. "That's me. First time I ever steered. First time I knew I'd come back to the water. No matter what." Samuel stared at the boy in the photo. Same nose, same angle of standing. "I think I'd recognize him anywhere," he said. They placed the photo inside the small drawer beside the bunk. Not hidden, not displayed. Just kept. That afternoon, they passed a small cluster of rocks jutting up from the sea. Elias pointed, "North of those. That's where the photo was taken." Samuel stood at the rail trying to see the past folded into the present. Waves curled around the stones in slow spirals, like time moving in reverse. In his journal that night, Samuel wrote, "I saw my grandfather as a boy today, and somehow I saw myself more clearly, too." He pressed the page flat and left it open, like a door slightly ajar for memory to step through. That morning, Elias asked Samuel to check the hull. "Not because anything's wrong," he said, "just because it's time." He handed him the small, rounded mirror, its handle worn smooth from years of salt and grip. "Use this to look beneath us. She'll show you what the surface won't." Samuel lay flat on the deck, careful and slow, lowering the mirror on a loop of rope just enough to catch the underside of the boat in the early light. At first he only saw sky reflections, then ripples, then the shadow of their boat, its wide belly and gentle dip floating steady like an old creature resting in its element. It looked bigger from below. Stronger, too. Samuel felt something settle in his chest. Like realizing the house you'd been living in had foundations you never fully understood. He cleaned barnacles that afternoon. It wasn't glamorous work, just scraping, rinsing, brushing, but it was meditative, simple, kind. Elias joined in, humming a tune from somewhere Samuel couldn't place. "Every boat has a ghost," Elias said, tapping the hull. "Ghost?" Samuel asked. Elias nodded. "Not a haunting kind, just the shape of every journey it's carried." Samuel paused. "So what's ours?" Elias looked up, his hands resting still on the scrub brush. Still being written. Later, they sat side by side on the bench beneath the sail. The water was calm again. The boat moved so gently it felt like they weren't sailing through the sea, but being carried by it. Samuel looked down at the planks beneath his feet. "I think the boat's more alive than I realized." Elias smiled, eyes soft. "That's because she is." That evening, Samuel wrote, "The part of the boat I can't see holds the part of the journey I don't always understand." He closed the journal slowly, letting the words sink deeper. It was a morning shaped like memory. Clear skies, a gentle rocking, and a chill just crisp enough to warrant a sweater. Samuel made tea while Elias sat by the helm, watching the sea like it was telling him something he'd heard before, but needed to hear again. When Samuel came up with 2 cups, he paused. Elias was gone from the chair. Not far, just below deck to fetch a rope, but for those few still seconds, the sight of the empty seat struck Samuel. It wasn't just a chair. It was where Elias always sat when he navigated, when he taught, when he stared ahead and let the world move gently toward him. It was where stories were told and silences were shared. Samuel placed the tea on the floor, sat on the other bench, and stared at the helm. A little wind moved through his shirt. And for the first time, he wondered what it might be like to be out here alone. Elias returned with a nod and sat back in the chair like nothing had changed. But it had. Samuel looked at him differently now. Less like a guide, more like a person. They didn't talk much that day. Just floated. Fished a little. Read a few pages from the old journal together. Then, as the sun lowered toward the horizon, Elias said, "Someday, this will be your boat." Samuel didn't answer, but he knew. And the weight of it felt less like a burden, more like something sacred. That night, Samuel wrote, "There will be a day when that chair is mine, but not yet, not today." Then he added, just beneath it, "I think the sea already knows." It was a quiet day, not just in weather, though the sea was smooth and the sky soft, but in the way both Samuel and Elias moved through it. They barely spoke, not from distance or tension, just understanding. Some days didn't ask for words. They started with warm bread and dried apricots, eaten on the deck with mugs of tea between them. The boat drifted in slow curves, the current taking them wherever it pleased. Neither of them reached for the wheel. Samuel pulled out his journal once, but didn't write. He just held it, the way someone might hold a photo or a letter, just to feel the weight of it. Elias spent the morning mending a net that had barely torn. Samuel watched his hands, slow and deliberate. He'd seen them do this 100 times, but today it looked different. Not just experience, devotional. As if each knot was a sentence in a language that didn't need to be spoken. In the late afternoon, a pair of dolphins appeared off the port side. Samuel pointed, smiling. Elias gave a soft chuckle, eyes never leaving the water. "They don't stay long," he said. And he was right. In moments they were gone. But something in Samuel's chest stayed light for a while after. That evening they shared a single story. It wasn't told out loud. It lived in the way they moved, one passing a tool before the other reached for it, one boiling water while the other found the tea. It was told in gestures, glances, and a shared gaze on the same slow-moving clouds. Before sleep, Samuel finally opened his journal. He wrote, "Today we spoke without speaking, and somehow I heard everything." Samuel woke early. Not to noise, but to a feeling, like something had arrived quietly in the middle of the night. The boat was still, and Elias was asleep in his bunk, breathing soft and steady. But Samuel couldn't shake the thought that the sea had left something at their doorstep. He crept up to the deck. There, nestled against the edge of the cabin where the morning light barely reached, was an envelope. Dry, pressed flat, yellowed at the corners. There was no name on the front. Just a single word, written in clean, careful script. Someday. He held it in both hands for a while, then brought it below. Elias stirred at the sound and blinked slowly, eyes settling on the envelope in Samuel's hands. "That old thing," he murmured. "You left it?" Elias shook his head. "It's just been waiting." Samuel raised an eyebrow. Elias sat up, rubbed his eyes, and gestured for him to open it. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper. The ink had faded, but it was legible. "If you're reading this, it means you're ready to know that I've always trusted you more than I could say aloud. The sea has a strange way of showing us who we are and what we carry. You're not lost. You're becoming." There was no signature. Samuel looked up, blinking slower now. "Who wrote it?" he asked. Elias shrugged gently. "Could have been me. Could have been someone before me. Might even be you one day." They kept the letter on the table between them as they ate. Didn't talk about it much. Didn't need to. But when Elias rose to check the lines, Samuel quietly folded the letter and tucked it into his journal, between 2 pages still waiting to be written. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Samuel wrote, "Some letters don't need to be mailed. They just need to be found." The sea was restless that day. Not angry, just unsettled. Small waves lapped at the hull with more insistence than usual, and the wind kept shifting directions, tugging at the sail as if it, too, couldn't make up its mind. Elias adjusted the lines. Samuel watched closely. There was a knot he hadn't seen before, something layered and elegant, like a braid held in place by the wind itself. "What's that one called?" he asked. Elias gave a half-smile. "Doesn't have a name. I just call it the one that holds." Samuel nodded, then leaned in closer. "Teach me?" Elias handed him the rope. They spent the afternoon practicing. The knot looked simple, but it wasn't. Every loop had to carry the right amount of tension. Every pull had to echo the previous one just right. Over and over Samuel tried. Each time he got closer, until finally, without quite knowing how, his hands made it. Elias tugged at it gently. It held. "That's the one," he said quietly. Afterward, they sat with their backs against the cabin wall, the breeze settling into something steady again. Elias stretched out his legs and closed his eyes for a moment. "I used to think being strong meant pulling tight," he said. Samuel waited. "But sometimes strength is knowing what to hold and when." That evening, the water softened. The sky turned the color of old postcards, rose and violet fading to ink. Samuel wrote in his journal, "Today I learned a knot that holds. I think I'll carry it in more than just rope." He tied the same knot in a piece of string and wore it around his wrist. Not for luck, but to remember. That night, the moon didn't rise. Not on time, at least. Samuel waited for it, eyes turned skyward as the stars blinked into being one by one. But the familiar silver arc was missing, its usual perch above the sail left strangely empty. "Is it gone?" he asked after a while, his voice soft in the cool night. Elias didn't look up from where he was coiling a rope. "No, just late." Samuel half smiled at that. "What if it doesn't show?" Elias shrugged gently. Then we learned to sail in darker water. The absence of moonlight made everything feel different. The boat seemed deeper, its edges blurred into the horizon. The sea was all sound and shape now, no gleam, no glint, only motion and mystery. Samuel lit the lantern inside the cabin. Its soft golden glow spread across the wood like warmth you could see. He left the door open so it could spill out and touch the deck. Not as bright as the moon, but still enough. Later, Elias joined him near the helm. They sat shoulder to shoulder, the kind of closeness that asked nothing. Elias spoke after a while. "When I was your age, I thought the sky owed me answers." Samuel turned to look at him. "And now?" Elias exhaled slowly. Now I think it's more about learning to ask the right questions. Just before sleep, Samuel looked up one last time. Still no moon. But the stars were brighter than ever. He opened his journal and wrote, "The sky forgot the moon tonight, but I remembered light anyway." Then he closed the book, not waiting for answers, but feeling full just the same. It started in the distance, far-off clouds bruising the horizon, barely more than a line at first. The wind picked up slowly, then faster, tugging at the sail like a whisper turning to a warning. But Elias didn't rush, and neither did Samuel. They had seen storms before. This one felt different, not just in shape, but in how they stood inside it. Prepared. Shaken. Elias handed Samuel the oilskin jacket without a word. Samuel took it and put it on, tying it snug at the waist. Then he helped stow the loose gear, tying everything down with the knot he'd learned just a few days ago, the one that held. The rain came in quiet bursts, more mist than torrent. The sky rumbled like a deep, slow drumbeat, steady, not angry. Samuel stood near the wheel, gripping the rail. He watched the water dance under the wind, its peaks curling but never crashing. Elias moved beside him, calm as ever. "You're not afraid," Samuel said quietly, half a question. Elias glanced at him, rain beating in his eyebrows. "Not of this," he replied. "Not anymore." For a while they worked in tandem, adjusting the sail, securing the tiller, letting the boat move with the rhythm instead of against it. It wasn't about control. It was about listening and trusting. By nightfall, the worst had passed. The sky cleared in pieces, stars peeking through like shy guests returning to a quiet room. They sat inside, jackets hung to dry, steam rising from mugs of broth on the little stove. "You did well today," Elias said, not as praise, but as fact. Samuel gave a small nod, eyes tired but content. "I wasn't sure I could," he said. Elias took a slow sip. That's when it matters most. Before bed, Samuel wrote, "The sea tested us today, but it felt more like an invitation than a trial. And just beneath it, maybe storms aren't to be avoided. Maybe they're how we remember we're real." They saw the harbor before the sun rose. Just a faint curve of lanterns blinking at the edge of the world. A dark silhouette of roofs and wharfs huddled beneath a waking sky. After so many days surrounded only by sea and stars, it looked both strange and familiar. Samuel leaned over the rail, watching the shore come into shape. Elias hadn't said much that morning. He moved with a slow care, checking ropes and rigging, but not out of worry, just reverence. The kind of movements one makes when crossing into something sacred. They weren't docking here. Not for long. Just enough to take on water, stretch their legs, maybe speak to someone who didn't speak in waves and wind. But it felt like a threshold. And thresholds ask us to pause. As the boat neared the dock, Elias called out in a voice Samuel had never heard him use. Low, but commanding, shaped by years. A dockhand caught their line. Samuel jumped ashore with the grace of someone who no longer felt like a passenger. He felt taller somehow, like the sea had added something to him. They walked into town without hurry. No destination. Just streets lined with quiet brick buildings, sleepy windows, and peeling paint. A cat watched them from a stoop. A man tipped his cap as he passed. The smell of coffee drifted from an open doorway. They didn't talk until they reached a bench near the water. Elias sat first. Samuel sat beside him. For a long time, they just listened, to gulls, to the creak of ships, to the unfamiliar hush of land. Finally, Elias spoke. "This was the last place I saw my father." Samuel turned surprised. "He left from here?" Elias nodded, didn't say where, just said he had one more crossing in him. "And did he?" "I never found out, but I like to think yes." Samuel sat with that for a while. The idea that some journeys are unfinished only from one side. That maybe a goodbye is sometimes just a shift in perspective. They walked the shoreline until afternoon, picked up a few supplies, shared a loaf of warm bread. Elias bought a tin of tea they didn't need, just because the smell reminded him of someone he never named. Back at the boat, as they prepared to leave again, Elias handed Samuel a folded piece of paper. "Read it later," he said. Samuel tucked it into his coat without asking. He didn't need to know everything yet. That night, under stars that felt a little sharper after the lights of town, Samuel opened his journal. He wrote, "Some places aren't meant to hold us, just to remind us we've been somewhere." And then, "This boat is still home." He looked at the folded paper Elias had given him. Still unopened. He smiled. Not yet. The wind was mild the next morning, just enough to push them from the dock with grace. They didn't speak much as they cast off, Samuel coiling the lines, Elias adjusting the sail with the rhythm of someone who had done it long enough to trust muscle over mind. The town shrank behind them, and with it something else receded, a weight Samuel hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Land had a way of pressing questions into you. The sea, he was learning, answered them in whispers. They returned to their rhythm. Tea, journals, quiet chores. And when the sun had warmed the deck enough to make the boards soft beneath his feet, Samuel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the letter Elias had given him. He unfolded it slowly. The paper was soft at the creases, like it had been folded and unfolded many times before. There was no greeting. No "Dear Samuel." No sign-off. Just a single paragraph written in Elias's careful, quiet script. "There are moments you won't know are important until they've passed. And some people you'll carry with you long after you've said goodbye. The ocean taught me this. I hope it teaches you more. Don't rush to understand everything. Let the water work on you." Samuel read it 3 times. Not because he didn't understand it, but because he did. He didn't show Elias the letter. Didn't need to. Instead, he picked up his own journal and wrote, "The letter didn't tell me what to do. It told me I already knew." Then he closed the book and sat quietly, letting the sea continue its slow, unhurried conversation. That afternoon, they caught no fish. Didn't try to. They just drifted. 2 generations. 1 boat. No destination but forward. It started with the scent of cedar. Samuel had found a loose panel near the bow and removed it to investigate a hollow sound. Behind it was a small storage space he'd never noticed before, dusty, forgotten, but not empty. Inside, a bundle of cloth, an old pencil, and a carved wooden bird, wings wide, tail curved like it had caught wind that no longer blew. He held it gently, brushing away flecks of time. It was delicate but not fragile. The initials T, E, were carved into the base. Elias saw it in Samuel's hand and paused. "That belonged to your great-grandfather," he said. "You kept it here?" "He did. I just never moved it." Samuel turned it over. "Why a bird?" Elias looked out to sea, because he dreamed of flying before he learned to sail. Then he realized the boat gave him something better. Samuel nodded. He could fly with the world, not above it. Elias smiled. "You're listening better than ever." They spent the rest of the morning airing out the hidden space, scrubbing the wood, relining it with a clean scrap of sailcloth. Samuel placed the bird gently inside again, not as something to bury, but as something preserved. He didn't close the panel fully, left it slightly ajar, like a breath paused. Later, they cooked a meal they hadn't planned. Salted fish, potatoes boiled in seawater, and the last of the lemon tucked into a drawer weeks ago. Elias added herbs from a paper envelope he'd kept hidden. They ate on the deck, with fingers and smiles, and not a single word spoken for nearly 20 minutes. It wasn't a meal of celebration. It was a meal of presence, of arrival. As the light faded and stars gathered, Samuel lit the lantern near the helm and sat beside it. The sea was soft again, like it was patting itself in cotton. Elias stood beside him and laid a hand on his shoulder. "I think it's your boat now," he said. Samuel didn't argue, didn't deflect. He just nodded. A quiet yes, not to the moment, but to everything it had taken to arrive here. In his journal, he wrote, "Today the boat stopped being a place I traveled in and started being a place I belonged to." He closed the book slowly, the kind of slow that means something. The next day began with silence. Not an absence, but a presence. The kind of hush that settles in when something important is about to happen and everything knows it except you. Samuel rose early and made tea. He checked the lines, not because he needed to, but because it had become part of who he was. Elias sat by the rail, his coat wrapped around him even though the sun was warm. "Do you remember the compass?" he asked, voice slow. "The one without the needle?" Samuel nodded. "It's in the drawer near the bunk." "Bring it." Samuel retrieved it, the small, round instrument whose center had long since lost its sense of direction. The face was cracked, the casing dented. It had never pointed north the entire trip. He handed it over. Elias held it in his palm like something sacred. "This was your great-grandfather's," he said. "He kept it long after it broke, said it reminded him that direction isn't the same as purpose." Samuel sat beside him. "He still found his way?" "Every time." They sat together in silence for a long while, watching the compass catch the light in broken glints. Then Elias held it out. Samuel hesitated. "It doesn't work," he said. Elias smiled. "Exactly, which means it won't lie to you. It can't tell you where to go. It can only remind you that you get to choose." Samuel took it gently, feeling the full weight of it, despite its size. He placed it in his coat pocket beside the letter. That afternoon they followed no map. No stars. No plan. Just the sea. The boat responded as though it knew this kind of sailing, as if it preferred it. The waves were light. The horizon stretched like an unfinished sentence. That night Elias seemed tired in a new way. Not weak. Just full. Like a story near its last page. He leaned against the wall of the cabin, watching the moon climb out of the sea like it had always belonged there. Samuel didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, like pages in the same book. Before sleep, Samuel opened his journal. He wrote, "Some compasses guide, others remind you that you're already where you need to be." And just below that, "Today we let the ocean decide, and I think she knew." It was the kind of morning that felt like a breath before a word. Soft light spilled over the water, catching the ridges of small waves like someone had drawn them by hand. The boat drifted without effort. Even the birds seemed quieter, flying in wider, slower arcs above. Elias hadn't come up yet. Samuel moved about the deck with practiced ease, checking the sail, pouring water into the kettle, brushing salt from the bench without even thinking about it. The sea had shaped him in small, invisible ways. When Elias finally emerged, he looked older. Not aged, but complete. Like a song near its final note. He sat at his usual place by the helm, taking the mug Samuel handed him with a quiet nod. They drank in silence. Watched the sun climb. Watched the world stay gentle. "You'll sail her alone someday," Elias said. It wasn't dramatic, no deep music in the background. Just a statement, one stone placed beside another. Samuel didn't speak for a long moment. He looked at the sea instead. "It won't feel the same without you," he finally said. Elias smiled softly. "That's how you'll know you're doing it right." Later that day, they cleaned the deck together. Not because it needed it, but because some things are meant to be kept ready. They polished the lantern glass. They folded the sails with care. They even tightened a hinge on the cabin door that had been loose for weeks. When the chores were done, they sat beneath the sailcloth awning, sharing bread and olives. "You've seen your own reflection in this sea now," Elias said. Samuel glanced at the water. "No, I've seen yours." Elias chuckled, eyes closed. "That's just the beginning." That night, the sea stilled completely, like it was listening, like it was giving them room, The stars came out in quiet clusters, and the air was filled with the scent of salt and warmth and something that felt like goodbye, but also like welcome. In his journal, Samuel wrote, "He said the horizon waits for us, but I think it's always been inside him." Then he paused, and beneath it wrote, "And now inside me." The wind had stopped entirely. Not slowed, stopped, as if the world itself had chosen to hold its breath. The sail hung still. The ropes didn't creak. Even the waves moved more like sighs than surf. Samuel stood alone on the deck. Elias was below, resting. And above, the stars were countless, more than he'd ever seen. They scattered across the black sky like silver dust, like some god had spilled them or offered them as a gift to sailors who'd learned to listen. It was the kind of sky that made time meaningless. The kind of night you could walk into and never reach the end of. Samuel lit the lantern by the mast, not because he needed the light, but because it felt like part of the ritual now. He poured 2 mugs of tea and set one aside, just in case Elias woke. Then he sat, and he waited. But not for anything. Just with the sea, with the sky, with the quiet that didn't feel lonely anymore. When Elias did emerge, he looked rested, but there was a softness in his movement, like something inside him had folded down gently while he slept. He took the mug Samuel had left for him without a word, sat beside him, and looked up. They didn't speak for a long while. Eventually Elias said, "I've only seen a sky like this once before." Samuel glanced over, waiting. "My first solo voyage, right after my father died. I was 19, scared, but the stars, they were like this, made me feel like maybe he wasn't that far." Samuel swallowed, his throat tight. "Maybe he wasn't." Elias nodded. "Maybe none of them are." The sky seemed to lean closer. The boat gently rocked in place, not moving forward, not drifting back. Just held. Held by water. Held by memory. Held by something invisible but real. Later, before sleep, Samuel returned to his journal. But instead of writing words, he drew. Not well. Not with detail. Just the shape of the boat beneath the stars. The 2 of them, sitting. The sea like a blanket beneath it all. And at the top of the page he wrote, "The sky didn't end tonight, and neither did we." Morning came without announcement. Just a gradual blue replacing the black. A hint of warmth along the edge of the sky, and the first slow breath of wind brushing across the sail like a hand over your shoulder, reminding you you're still here. Samuel was already awake. Elias was still below, his breath even and soft. But something in the air felt different. Like the boat was waiting. Like the day had meaning in it. He brewed tea as always, careful not to rattle the tin. Set 1 mug at Elias's place and took his own to the deck. The sea was gentle, low light rolling across it in waves of silver. Then came the sound, soft footsteps up the stairs. Elias stepped out. He moved slower than usual, but not with pain. With weight. Like someone aware that every movement was now being made in memory, too. They didn't speak for a long while. They sipped their tea. They watched the sea. And then, without turning, Elias said, "It's time." Samuel knew what he meant. Not just the voyage, the giving over. The moment all this had been leading to, not an end, not really, but the point where one hand lets go and the other catches. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out something small, a folded piece of chart paper, stained and softened by years. He handed it to Samuel. "It's not a map," he said. "It's the first one I ever drew myself." Samuel opened it gently. There were no names, no directions, just shapes. Islands, wind marks, circles where fish had once been, a drawing of the sun, and 1 word inked at the bottom. Trust. Elias stood steady but quiet. He looked out at the water, then at Samuel. "This is your crossing now," he said. And just like that, he stepped back below deck. Samuel stayed up top, at the helm. Not because he had to, but because he was ready. He placed the map beside the compass and for a long time just let the boat drift. No destination, only direction. No question, only trust. By sunset, the water was golden and long, stretching out like the beginning of something. Samuel opened his journal one final time. He wrote, "I used to think the horizon was a line we reached. Now I think it's a place inside us that opens when we're ready." He closed the journal and set it beside him. Then he stood, hands on the rail, wind at his back, and smiled. Thank you for listening to The True Horizon here on Sleep Stories, Restless Minds. If this journey helped you rest, reflect, or simply breathe a little easier, we invite you back anytime. Remember, some stories are meant to carry you across the sea and some carry you home. Sleep well, dream gently, and we'll see